I have told this story exactly once before, to my solicitor, and only because he needed to understand why the marriage settlement was structured the way it was. He listened with the face of a man being informed that the sky had decided to become green, wrote down everything I said in his careful hand, and then looked up at me and said, "Your Grace, you are aware that this is not generally how engagements are formed." I told him I was aware. He said nothing further. He is a wise man. The truth is that I had lived at Morthwaite for 11 years without incident. 11 years of exactly the right amount of silence, the right number of visitors at the right intervals, the right blend of duty and solitude that suited a man who had inherited a dukedom at 19 and spent the decade following it becoming exactly the sort of person that other people preferred to admire from a distance. I was not unkind. I was not cruel. I simply required a great deal of space, and I had arranged my life accordingly. Morthwaite Hall sits on the edge of the Derbyshire moorlands like a man who has decided to stop arguing with the weather. The stone is old. The rooms are large. The library has 4,000 volumes, a fireplace that draws properly, and a leather chair that has accommodated the weight of my thoughts for more years than I care to count. The nearest neighbor of consequence is 11 miles south. This had always seemed to me not a deficiency but an achievement. My grandmother had other opinions. She had been voicing those opinions at regular intervals since my 26th birthday, and I had developed over the years a comprehensive system for neither absorbing nor directly opposing them. I agreed that it was time I considered the matter. I agreed that the estate required an heir. I agreed, in the most general possible terms, that matrimony was a fine institution. I then returned to the library and read for another 6 months. She had tried, in the years since, introducing me to 7 young women of impeccable family and tolerably reasonable character, and I had found in each of them something to admire and nothing that made me want to be in the same room at breakfast. I am not a romantic man. I do not say that with pride. It is simply an accurate accounting of my nature. I had assumed I would marry eventually, for the reasons one marries, and that the union would be civilized and perhaps even warm, in the way that a well-maintained fire is warm. Reliable, useful, not particularly surprising. I had not anticipated Cecily Vane. She arrived on a Thursday evening in October, during one of those storms the moors produce without apology, the kind that comes in sideways off the high ground and makes the windows rattle in their frames as though the house itself is nervous. I was in the library. I had been in the library since morning. There was a particular question in Hobbes that I had been turning over for several days, and I was close, I thought, to something that might be called an answer. My butler, Ferris, knocked at 8:30 to inform me that my grandmother's guests had arrived. Lady Osworth, great-aunt to some young woman or other, and the young woman herself, whose name I did not catch and did not ask to have repeated. They had been traveling from Leicestershire, and the storm had caught them on the high road. Ferris had put Lady Osworth in the yellow room and the young woman in the room adjoining it, on the east corridor. I said that was fine. I asked for another lamp. I returned to Hobbes. I did not go down to dinner. I had told my grandmother I would not be at Morthwaite this week. This was technically accurate, as I had intended to be in Buxton. But the weather had turned before I could leave, and so I was here, and I had sent down my regrets and a bottle of the Bordeaux I knew my grandmother liked, and I considered that to be a reasonable accommodation of everyone's needs. I worked until midnight. Then I banked the fire, took my candle, and went to bed. I should explain the geography of Morthwaite, because it matters. The old wing and the new wing of the house are connected by a long gallery on the first floor, and the gallery branches at the midpoint. Left leads to the family rooms, right leads to the east corridor and the guest quarters. The turning is easy to miss in daylight and nearly invisible in the dark. There is a portrait at the junction, my great-grandfather, who had a face like an unfinished cliff, and in candlelight the portrait throws a shadow that makes the left turning look like a wall. At midnight I was in my study, not yet in bed. I had remembered on the stairs a letter I had meant to answer, and I had turned back to write it. The study is off the family corridor, second door on the left. I heard footsteps on the gallery, soft ones, hesitant, the steps of someone who was not entirely sure where they were going. Then a pause. Then the door opened. She was holding a candle in one hand and a book in the other, and she was wearing a dressing gown the color of old ivory, and her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, and she was looking at me with an expression that cycled in the space of perhaps 2 seconds, through confusion, alarm, profound mortification, and something that resolved itself. And this is the detail I have never been able to account for into composure. Not the composure of someone suppressing panic, the composure of someone taking stock. She looked at the desk, she looked at the shelves, she looked at me. "Wrong door," she said. I should have agreed immediately. I should have said yes, clearly a mistake. The guest rooms are to the right, good night. This is what a man of sense does when a young woman wanders into his private rooms at midnight. Instead, for a reason I still cannot fully explain, I said, "That depends on who's asking." She stared at me. I stared back. The candle she was holding threw a thin gold circle on the floor between us. Then she said, "I was looking for the room with the atlas. Your housekeeper mentioned there was a library off the east corridor." "There isn't," I said. "There is a library off the west corridor. This is my study." "Ah," she said, with a tone that managed to convey both genuine apology and a complete absence of the deferential fluttering I might have expected. "I see. I am sorry to have disturbed you." She glanced at the bookshelves again, involuntarily, I thought, the way a person does when they are interested in something and are trying not to show it. Then she looked at me again and said, "You are the Duke." "I am." "You were supposed to be in Buxton." "The weather changed." "Yes," she said, and something moved through her expression, not quite amusement but adjacent to it. "It tends to do that." She withdrew. The door closed. I sat at my desk for a good 3 minutes before I remembered the letter. I should note that at no point during this exchange did I establish her name. She was simply a young woman in an ivory dressing gown with a book tucked under her arm, looking at my bookshelves with the assessing attention of a person who takes libraries seriously. This is, I recognize, an insufficient basis for anything. Nevertheless, I did not sleep well. My grandmother found me at breakfast. This was not accidental. My grandmother does not do accidental. She has been navigating drawing rooms and dining tables for 71 years, and she knows, with the precision of a cartographer, exactly which room any given person is in at any given hour, and she arrives there at the moment that best suits her purposes. I was eating alone. I had requested an early breakfast specifically to be finished before the household assembled. I was 3 bites into my eggs when the door opened and my grandmother came in, followed by a small white dog of uncertain ancestry who treated the dining room as sovereign territory, followed by Cecily Vane. I knew her name by then. Ferris had mentioned it when he brought the coffee. Cecily Vane, youngest daughter of the Reverend Aldous Leonard Vane of Osworth in Leicestershire, a vicar's daughter, companion to Lady Osworth, who was her grey-tan on the maternal side and who had accepted my grandmother's invitation, because the 2 old women had been friends since before either of them was a grandmother. She was wearing pale green in the morning light. Her hair was up. She looked like a woman who had decided, at some point in the preceding night, that the most reasonable response to an embarrassing situation was to walk directly through it. She met my eyes when she came through the door and held them for exactly 2 seconds, just long enough to communicate that she remembered the study and was not going to pretend otherwise, and then looked at my grandmother and said, "Good morning, Lady Thornwick," in a voice that was perfectly pleasant and gave nothing away. My grandmother looked at me. Then she looked at Cecily. Then she looked at me again, and something shifted in her expression that I recognized with a sinking feeling, a particular quality of attention, like a chess player who has just seen 3 moves ahead. "Aldous," she said, "Cecily was just telling me she had some difficulty finding her way last night. The east corridor is confusing in the dark." Her voice was entirely neutral. Apparently she found herself rather deep into the house before she realized her error. There was a pause. "It was entirely my fault," Cecily said. She directed this at my grandmother, not at me. "The turning in the gallery was not well lit, and I ought not to have wandered without a proper map of the house. I should like to apologize to anyone I disturbed." "Oh, I'm sure you caused no trouble," my grandmother said. "Aldous keeps very late hours. He was no doubt working." Another pause. My grandmother's definition of very late hours and the timing implied by Cecily having been in a dressing gown were, in a house full of servants who had been at Morthwaite for decades, going to produce a particular quality of morning conversation in the kitchen. I was aware of this. My grandmother was, I had no doubt, also aware of this and considered it useful. I said it was no inconvenience. I looked at Cecily when I said it. "The gallery is genuinely difficult in the dark. I have been meaning to have the sconces at the junction replaced." She met my gaze again, and again I had that sense of someone assessing rather than performing. "Thank you, Your Grace." A small pause. "That is a very practical solution." My grandmother smiled with immense satisfaction and called for more toast. By the time I had finished my breakfast and returned to the library, the story, in the form most agreeable to my grandmother's vision of events, had already reached at least 2 footmen, the housekeeper and Lady Osworth, who had a memory like a legal document and a great fondness for my grandmother, and who appeared at the library door at 10 o'clock to tell me, with perfect pleasantness, that Cecily was a dear girl, that she had the very highest opinion of her character, and that she hoped my grandmother's house party would be a success. I thanked her, she left. I stared at the Hobbs and read the same sentence 4 times. The formal announcement, if one could call it that, came at luncheon. I say announcement, but my grandmother did not announce. She never announces. She simply managed the conversation, over soup, to a point at which Lady Osworth remarked that it was a charming thing, young people finding one another in unexpected ways, and my grandmother said that she had always thought so, and the 2 of them beamed at Cecily and at me with the coordinated warmth of people who have already decided how the rest of the week will proceed. Cecily set down her soup spoon. I watched her do it. She set it down with a precise, controlled movement, and then she looked at my grandmother, and her expression was very still. "Lady Thornwick," she said, "I wonder if I might have a word with you privately after luncheon." My grandmother patted her hand. "Of course, dear, but there is really no need to be formal. These things have a way of settling themselves." "These things," Cecily said, "have not yet been settled in any direction. I think it is important to say that clearly." My grandmother beamed at her. Such a sensible girl. That evening I encountered Cecily in the West Corridor. She was carrying the atlas. She had apparently located the library by daylight, and she stopped when she saw me and said, without preamble, "Your Grace, I should like to apologize. My wandering last night was careless, and whatever your grandmother is choosing to imply about it, I hope you know I have no intention of holding you to any consequence of it. I am a vicar's daughter with a limited income and no social standing worth your consideration. I would find it mortifying to be thought of as attempting to entrap a duke." She said all of this very fast, looking at a point somewhere to the left of my shoulder, the way people do when they have rehearsed something and are trying to get it out before their nerve fails. I said, "Have you eaten?" She blinked. "I beg your pardon." I asked whether you had eaten. "It is past 7. The household has not gathered for dinner yet. I was going to the kitchen garden." I paused. "There is a door off the pantry. It leads to the south wall. I go there occasionally when I require a specific variety of silence. She looked at me for a moment, then she said, a specific variety. The kind without other people in it. And you are inviting me. I am pointing out that the door exists, I said. What you do with that information is your own business. She held the atlas for another second, then tucked it under her arm. I have not eaten. The kitchen garden at Morthwaite is enclosed by stone walls on 3 sides and opens on the 4th to the moor. In October it smells of turned earth and the last of the kitchen herbs, rosemary, thyme, something cold and mineral coming off the high ground beyond. There is a bench along the south wall, worn smooth by several generations of people who wanted to look at something that wasn't a ceiling. We sat on it. A footman had brought bread and cold meat and a pot of tea without being asked, which meant Ferris had seen us go and had drawn his own conclusions, which meant the conclusions of the household were now uniform. I noted this and decided that there was nothing to be done about it and that the bread was very good. Cecily ate with the practical appetite of a person who was hungry and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. This was, I found, pleasant. After a while she said, "The Atlas is Sanson, 1674. Your library is extraordinary." "It is a good library," I agreed. "I have never seen a private collection with such depth in the natural philosophers." She paused. "Do you actually read them, or are they for display?" I read them. All of them. Most of them. Some of them were purchased by my father and have not been opened since. I find it useful to know which ones those are. She looked at me with an expression I was beginning to catalogue, the one where she was processing something and had decided the honest response was better than the diplomatic one. Why? Because it tells me something about the difference between what a person says they value and what they actually value, I said. My father said he valued scholarship. He valued the idea of scholarship. They are different things. A pause. The wind came in off the moor, smelling of coming rain. My father, Cecily said, values parish records and the complete sermons of Archbishop Tillotson. He has read all of them, several of them twice. She looked at the garden. He is a very consistent man. You say that with a great deal of affection. I say it with a great deal of affection and a certain amount of longing for a wider library. A small pause. That sounds disloyal. It isn't. He taught me to read Latin. He sat with me through 6 winters of bad weather and read Greek plays aloud while my mother did the mending and my sisters learned embroidery. He did not think it was peculiar to want to know things. She stopped. I'm sorry. You asked 1 question, and I have answered 5. I asked because I wanted to know, I said. She looked at me. It was the same 2-second accounting she had given me in the study at midnight, the look that felt less like being observed and more like being understood at some essential, practical level, as if she was not deciding what to think of me but was simply noting what was already there. Your Grace, she said. Aldous. I beg your pardon. My name is Aldous. You may use it or not as you choose, but Your Grace is what my tenants call me when they want something, and it makes me feel like a category rather than a person. A pause. Then, Aldous, she said, and there was something careful in the way she said it, as though she was holding a piece of glass up to the light. I meant what I said in the corridor, about the morning. I would not want you to feel. Cecily. I had not used her name before. I noticed that she noticed. My grandmother has been trying to produce this precise situation for 6 years. She has done it through drawing room maneuvers and introductions and strategic invitations, and it has produced nothing because none of it has been, I stopped, looking for the word. Real, she said. Real, I agreed. We sat with that for a moment. The garden was very quiet. I should still like to write to your grandmother, she said, and make the situation plain. Whatever your grandmother hopes, I have not agreed to anything. That is fair, I said, so have I. She glanced at me. Have you? I was planning to dissolve the situation entirely when she raised it at luncheon, I said. I chose not to. I am not entirely sure why. You chose not to, she repeated. I chose not to, I confirmed. She looked at the garden again. After a long moment she said, the Sanson Atlas has a plate of the Derbyshire peak that is quite inaccurate. The draftsman appears to have had no direct knowledge of the high moor and was working from description. I know, I said. My great-grandfather made corrections in the margin in red ink. May I see them? Yes, I said. We went back inside. The days that followed had a quality that I find difficult to describe precisely, though I have spent some time attempting it. They were not dramatic. No one declared anything. No formal understanding was proposed or accepted. What happened was quieter than that, and I think more durable. My grandmother watched everything with the expression of a gardener watching something she has planted come up in a different color than expected, pleased and intrigued, and wise enough not to interfere. Lady Osworth took daily constitutionals along the moor path and returned with mud on her boots and the serene look of a woman who has placed all her confidence in the outcome and is simply waiting for it to arrive. Cecily and I read in the library in the mornings. This was not arranged. She appeared on the second morning at 9:30 with her own book, found a chair at the far end of the room and read without speaking. I read without speaking. At 11, Ferris brought coffee. At 12, we ate in the dining room with my grandmother and Lady Osworth. In the afternoons, Cecily walked on the moor path. She walked quickly, and at length, with a purposefulness that suggested she was not so much taking the air as settling an argument she was having with herself. I began to take the moor path in the afternoons. We had not discussed this. We also did not discuss the fact that we always ended up walking in the same direction, at the same pace, and arriving back at the south gate at approximately the same time. Neither of us mentioned it. There are, I have learned, conversations that proceed more honestly without words. She knew a great deal about the natural world. Not the drawing-room kind of natural knowledge, not pressed flowers and watercolor sketches, but the real, Latin-named, argued-over kind. She knew the difference between 3 species of moorland grass and why it mattered. She knew which of the stone outcroppings on the high moor were limestone and which were gritstone, and what that told you about the land's deep history. She knew this not because it was ornamental knowledge, but because her father had taught her, and she had read, and she was the sort of person for whom knowing things was not separate from being alive. On the third afternoon I said, "You read law." She glanced at me surprised. "Legal philosophy, not law." "I cannot practice anything." "Why legal philosophy?" "Because it is the study of how societies decide to order what is fair," she said, and I found I had strong opinions about fairness. "What kind of opinions?" "The kind that are useless in a vicar's drawing room," she said, and there was something dry in it, and also something resigned, the tone of a person who has long since catalogued the distance between the world that exists and the world that ought to. "The kind that make my sisters look at me the way people look at a piece of furniture that has arrived at the wrong address." "They are not unkind," I said, "your sisters." "No, they are good women who understand the world as it is and make the most of it. I have never been able to fully convince myself to do the same." A pause. She looked out over the moor, the wind pulling at the pins in her hair. "I am told this is a deficiency." "It isn't," I said. She looked at me, I looked back. The wind moved through the heather. "You are very certain of that," she said. "Yes," I said. After a moment she said, "Why?" I thought about how to answer this honestly. "Because the women I have met who understand the world as it is tend to find me perfectly acceptable," I said, "and the women who think it ought to be otherwise tend to find me." I paused. "Insufficient," she offered. "Predictable," I said. "I have been told I am very predictable." She considered this. You invited a woman you had met for 30 seconds in your private study, at midnight, to sit in a kitchen garden with you. I pointed out that the door to the garden existed, I said, and declined to dissolve an accidental engagement. I chose not to confirm or deny it in a formal setting. That is, she said, a very fine distinction. It is the distinction that felt honest, I said. A long pause. The moor stretched out to the north in long gray-green waves, the sky enormous above it, the kind of sky that makes a person feel simultaneously very small and very clear. Aldous, she said, and I noticed again the careful way she used my name, like something she was still deciding whether to keep. I should tell you something. Tell me. I came to Morthwaite because my aunt required a companion and I had nothing else to do, she said. My oldest sister is recently married and has her own household. My second sister is engaged. My mother is well. My father has the parish and 6 able-bodied deacons. She paused. There was no particular place for me in Leicestershire at this moment. My aunt asked, and I said yes because I did not have a better offer and because I thought. She stopped again. What did you think? I thought it was better to be somewhere different than somewhere familiar that had grown too small. She looked at the heather. That sounds dramatic. It was not dramatic. It was simply the accumulation of a number of small things that had arrived at a conclusion. What conclusion? That a very intelligent woman with no money and no connections and inconvenient opinions has, in the present arrangement of the world, a very limited number of futures available to her, she said. And that spending my time being furious about it was not going to change the arrangement, so I had better find out which of the available futures I could bear most cheerfully. I was quiet for a moment, then I said, "What are the available futures?" She looked at me with an expression that was briefly unguarded, something between amusement and a much older, quieter tiredness. My aunt's companion, indefinitely. A position as governess if I can find a suitable household. Or marriage, to someone willing to take a vicar's daughter with strong opinions about Roman law. Have you had offers? 2, she said. A solicitor in Melton Mowbray and a curate who was very kind and very dull and could not understand why I wanted to read anything that was not scripture. She paused. I declined both. Why? She gave me a look that was, for a moment, quite direct. Because I found I could not convince myself to be someone's wife if I could not also be myself, she said, and neither of them had any particular interest in the self that comes with the arrangement. I looked at the moor for a long time. Then I said, I have been told that I am difficult to talk to. I find you entirely possible to talk to, she said. My grandmother would find that observation gratifying. I suspect, Cecily said, with a small, very dry note in her voice, that your grandmother finds almost everything about the current situation gratifying. She does, I said. She is wrong about most of the details and correct about the essential thing, which is a quality she has always had. Cecily said nothing, but she did not walk away. On the 5th morning, I found a letter on my desk. It was written in a clear, unornamented hand on cream paper. Her paper, I could tell, because it was the lightweight kind that travels well in a woman's writing case, and it was addressed to me formally, and it said, Your Grace, I have given the matter of the past several days a great deal of thought, and I believe the honest course of action is to write to you directly rather than to allow a situation to continue that was established by accident and maintained, I think, by a combination of your grandmother's determination and our mutual failure to prevent it. I do not doubt that your grandmother means well, and I have the highest regard for her. I also do not doubt that you are a man of integrity who would not knowingly allow a woman to be misled about her situation. For that reason, I want to be clear. I have no claim on you. The circumstances of that first night were entirely accidental, and nothing that has passed since constitutes an agreement of any kind. You are under no obligation to me whatsoever. I intend to tell my aunt as much this morning, and I hope that we may continue the remaining days of the house party pleasantly and without constraint. Yours faithfully, Cecily Vane. I read it once, then I read it again. Then I picked it up and went to find her. She was in the library. She was not reading. She was sitting in the chair by the south window with her hands in her lap, looking at the garden, in the posture of a person who has just done something they consider correct and is waiting to feel better about it. I came in, she turned. I held up the letter. She said, I thought it was important to be clear. It is very clear, I said. Then you agree that? No, I said. A pause, she looked at me carefully. No. I do not agree, I said. I understand the argument. It is a good argument. It is the argument of a person who is trying to be fair, which is, I stopped. Which is one of the things I find most, I stopped again. I am not, as I have said, a romantic man. I do not have at my disposal the vocabulary of sentiment that some men seem to carry naturally. What I have is precision, the habit of saying exactly what I mean, no more and no less, which is useful in a library and occasionally insufficient everywhere else. I said, Cecily. She said, yes. I said, I have not sat in the library in the morning with another person without finding it an intrusion in 11 years. I held up the letter. I tore the letter, not because your argument was wrong, but because I did not want it to be right. I looked at her. That is probably not the kind of thing one says in a formal correspondence. She was very still. No, she said, it isn't. I have been trying, I said, to determine whether what I am experiencing is gratitude for the novelty of good conversation, which will pass, or something more durable, which requires a different kind of response. I have not been able to determine this conclusively. How long, she said carefully, have you been conducting this determination? Since approximately, I said, 30 seconds after you closed my study door. She looked at me. The morning light came through the south window and lay across the floor between us in a long, warm band. Aldous, she said. Yes. I wrote that letter, she said, because I thought you would be relieved. I know, I said. I did not want you to feel, she stopped. I did not want it to be said later that I had taken advantage of a situation that. Cecily, I took 2 steps forward. I am a duke. I am in possession of one of the largest estates in Derbyshire. I have an income that is, I paused, sufficient. I have 4 solicitors, a grandmother who can dismantle any social misapprehension inside an afternoon, and the legal capacity to dissolve any arrangement I choose without reference to anyone's opinion. No one has taken advantage of anyone. She looked up at me. From this distance I could see that her composure, that particular quality of practical steadiness that I had been cataloging since midnight on the first night, was not as seamless as I had thought. It was a real thing, a real quality of her character, but it was built, as real things are, over something more uncertain, the same uncertainty I was attempting not to show. Then what, she said, is it that you want? I said, I want to keep the morning hours in the library. I want to walk the moor path in the afternoon. I want to argue about Hobbes over dinner with someone who has read him properly and has actual objections. I paused. I want to show you the corrections my great-grandfather made in the margins of the Sanson Atlas, and I want to hear what you think of them. I stopped. I want a great number of things that I have apparently not wanted before, and which seem to require your continued presence in this house to remain possible. A silence. Outside the south window, the moor lay still under a November gray sky. She said, that is a remarkably thorough description of the situation. I told you I was precise. You told me you were predictable. I told you I had been told that, I said. I did not confirm it. Something moved through her expression then, the same small, careful thing that was adjacent to amusement but deeper than it, the thing I had seen in the kitchen garden when she talked about her father reading Greek plays aloud. Something that lived close to the part of her that had decided to be sensible about the available futures and had not entirely made her peace with it. "Aldous," she said, "I am a vicar's daughter. I have one good dress and a small annuity from my grandmother's estate, and a reading knowledge of Latin, Greek, and enough French to embarrass myself in Paris. I have strong opinions about legal philosophy and very few connections of any social use. I have never been presented at court, and I am 24, and I have been told on more than one occasion that my manner is honest," I said. She blinked. I was going to say forthright. "Both," I said, "both are accurate." She looked at me for a very long moment. Outside, a wind came off the high ground and ran through the garden, bending the last of the autumn grass along the south wall. "If I am to stay," she said, "I will not be decorative. I will read in the library. I will argue about things. I will walk in the mud. I will have opinions about your estate management and your tenants and your great-grandfather's marginalia, and I will express those opinions. And I will not pretend to have fewer thoughts than I do in order to make the house more comfortable." "Good," I said. "I will also," she said, "require you to tell me when you are retreating into the library for the variety of silence that does not include other people, so that I know the difference between that and something I have done wrong." "I will tell you," I said. "And I will require," she said, and her voice was very steady, "to be spoken to directly, about everything that matters, not managed, not handled, spoken to." "Yes," I said. "Then," she said, and something settled in her face, not surrender, but something more like arrival, the expression of a person who has been navigating by partial information and has just been given the complete map, "I will stay." I held out my hand. She looked at it. Then she took it, and her grip was firm and entirely without ceremony, and I thought, yes, this is the thing I did not have a word for. This is the specific variety of silence I had no previous experience with, the kind that has another person's thinking in it and is better for it. My grandmother appeared in the doorway approximately 30 seconds later. I do not know how she knew. I have never asked. It is possible she was simply in the corridor for unrelated reasons. It is possible, and perhaps more probable, that she had been managing the timing of the last 5 days with a degree of precision that I do not wish to examine too closely. She looked at us. She looked at our joined hands. She looked at me. Then she looked at Cecily and said, "I shall write to your father this afternoon if you have no objection." Cecily said, "I would prefer to write to him myself, Lady Thornwick." My grandmother considered this. "You will do it today." "I will do it today." "Very well." My grandmother's expression was one I had not seen since I was 7 years old and had correctly identified the genus of a bird she had shown me in the garden, an expression of deep, uncomplicated satisfaction, as though the world had confirmed something she had always known it would. "I will have Ferris bring tea." She departed. The small white dog, which had apparently been in the doorway as well, trotted after her. Cecily looked at me. "Does she always move at that speed?" "Faster," I said, "when she is pleased." "How fast does she move when she is displeased?" "I have not been able to measure it precisely," I said. "The results are difficult to observe in real time." She laughed a real laugh, brief and unguarded, the first I had heard from her, and I found that it changed something in the quality of the room, the way a window open changes the quality of the air. I filed the sound of it in the part of my memory where I keep the things I do not wish to lose. We married in December, in the chapel at Morthwaite, in the company of my grandmother and Lady Osworth, and a modest party that included Cecily's father, a quiet, precise man who had clearly passed his best qualities to his youngest daughter, and who shook my hand at the door with a grip that said, plainly, that he was trusting me with something of very great value, and that he was aware of the magnitude of what he was doing. I told him I was aware of it too. He nodded once and went in. Cecily's sisters were pleasant and slightly bewildered, in the way of people who have been brought in for an occasion that does not entirely make sense to them. They kept looking between Cecily and the house and me with expressions that suggested they were attempting to reconcile several pieces of information that did not readily cohere. I did not feel it was my place to assist them. The ceremony was brief and very cold and entirely correct. Cecily wore a gown the color of old cream, not the ivory dressing gown from the first night, though I thought of it, and her hair was arranged simply, with a few dark curls at her temples, and she said her vows in a clear, level voice with the same composure she had brought to every other difficult moment, and I said mine, and the words entered the cold chapel air and settled there and became permanent. Afterwards she stood beside me at the door in the December light and received the good wishes of the household, all of them, down to the youngest stable lad, with the particular quality of dignity she had brought to Morthwaite from the beginning, the kind that does not announce itself because it does not need to. My grandmother stood nearby and beamed at everything within range. Ferris appeared to have something in his eye. In the evening, when the last of the guests had gone to their rooms, and the house had settled into its particular winter quiet, the kind that sounds different when there is someone else in it, Cecily came to find me in the library. She had a book. She also had what appeared to be the Sanson Atlas, which was a considerable volume to carry under one arm while also holding a candle. I said, "You are going to drop that." "I am not going to drop it," she said. "I have been managing large books for several years without incident." She settled into the chair at the far end of the room and opened the atlas on her lap and said, without looking up, "Derbyshire, page 47. I sat down. I found the page. My great-grandfather's corrections ran along the eastern margin in red ink, precise, certain, the notations of a man who had walked the ground and knew it better than the cartographer. I had looked at them 100 times. Looking at them now, with Cecily's head bent over them beside mine, the red ink catching the firelight, was different in the same way that the library was different since she had begun reading in it, not because anything had changed in the room, but because the room had been corrected. She traced one annotation with her fingertip. "He walked the whole ridge." "Every foot of it," I said. "He wrote about it in a journal. I can find it for you." "Tomorrow," she said. "It is late." She did not look up. "Aldous." "Yes." "The door at the east end of the gallery." "What about it?" "It should have a lamp at the junction," she said. "I nearly missed the turning again this evening." I looked at her. I said I would have the sconces replaced. "You said you had been meaning to," she said. "It is December now. You have been meaning to for some time." "I will speak to Ferris in the morning." "Good." She turned a page of the atlas. "There are 3 more inaccuracies on this plate. Your great-grandfather has marked 2 of them." "What is the third?" "The beck in the northeast quarter," she said. "He has drawn it running south. It runs northeast. You can see it from the High Moor path. We passed it on Thursday." I looked at the plate. She was entirely correct. "Yes," I said. She looked up finally, and the firelight was in her eyes, and she had the expression of a person who has found something to be precisely as good as they had thought it might be, not surprised, but settled. Content in the particular way of someone who has arrived somewhere that fits. "I like your library," she said. "I know," I said. "I noticed." "I noticed you noticing," she said. "I know that too," I said. She looked at me for a moment longer, with that same careful attention she had brought to everything from the beginning, the attention that did not flatten or perform but simply looked, and saw, and understood. Then she turned back to the atlas. We sat in the library until the fire burned low, and the wind off the moor found the gap under the south door as it always does, and the house held us quietly in its old stone rooms, and outside the world was dark and cold and enormously indifferent, and inside there was firelight and the smell of old paper and the sound of a page turning, and I understood, with the precision I had always preferred to sentiment, that this was what I had been missing without knowing the shape of it. She had come through the wrong door. It was, without any qualification, the best thing that had ever happened to me.